following is a Comfortably Zoned Radio Network production.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Tony D'Angelo's PM Coast to Coast. Now, here's your host, Tony D'Angelo.
And a very good afternoon to you, all of the stations up and down the Comfortably Zoned Radio Network. And everyone listening today, whether you are listening live or whether you are listening via the recording or podcast, I'm Tony D'Angelo, your host of Tony D'Angelo's PM Coast to Coast, and I have a wonderful guest for you, and this man has been wonderful to me. He's been a contributor on the show for a number of years. David Andelman. David has a background that is longer than your arm. He is a graduate of Harvard, the Columbia Graduate School of Journalism, the editor of the World Policy Journal for 7 years. He was the executive editor at Forbes, business editor of the New York Daily News, and has been an international correspondent, most recently in Paris with CNN. And David is chock full of information. I can't wait to get him on here. I'm sure you can't wait to listen to him. So sit back, have a something you like to drink, and whatever it is, make sure if you're where I am, it is freezing. Make sure it's hot. We're going to have David up here in a moment here on Tony D'Angelo's PM Coast to Coast, and it is an honor and a pleasure. We'll be right back right after this. Alerting the stations up and down the line, we will have David Andelman right after this interlude. Ladies and gentlemen, up and down the stations of the Comfortably Zoned Radio Network, I am joined by our good friend of the show, international correspondent David Andelman. David, first of all, thank you. Very belated Happy New Year, and it's great to see you back on safe shores, my friend.
Well, it depends. I'm not quite sure where one is safer these days. In New York, Pennsylvania, where I am right now, out in our country house out in the woods, or in Paris. Safety is, I guess, relative.
Yeah, that's for sure. Before we got on, I was mentioning to you, I've got a long list of many things to discuss. But let's talk about what's happening with the trade talks in China. I'm as confused as anyone.
Well, there's no real clarity here. I think pretty much everybody's confused. Probably the ones who are trying to negotiate this as much as anybody else. But it's interesting. Both sides need to have this done. China needs to have it done for its own economic purposes. Trump needs to have it done for not only the American economy, but his own political fortunes, especially after that 35-day shutdown of the government. He needs to show that he can get something accomplished from all of his toing and froing. So both sides need to have something done. But what's interesting is that may not be the biggest challenge that the Chinese pose to us. There are a host of other challenges that the Chinese have to offer that are not on the table and probably should not be on the table. But China has been at least as aggressive in attacking us as Russia has. In cyber terms, even military challenges going forward. So we should not, in any sense, disregard the Chinese as a formidable opponent, even though they may eventually become partners in trade, hopefully.
It's, do you think it helps or hurts to have Yo Ha as the chief Chinese negotiator? He was educated here.
Right. No, he was. And if you heard him speak, actually, in the Oval Office with Trump the other day, when we heard the full tape of the full report on that discussion. So, yeah, he's very American. Well, I won't say Americanized. times, but he certainly does understand the language and probably our society as well as any of the top Chinese leaders, and I think that can be useful. Otherwise, the Chinese unfortunately have a tendency to demonize the U.S. and as do a lot of our adversaries or even friends abroad. So really understanding that there is also more to the United States than simply Donald Trump is very useful. It was interesting in that session with the Chinese. There was Low and a couple of other members of the delegation in the Oval Office. Trump repeatedly came back to what really good things you're doing for the American farmers and so on. And this is very important. And the Chinese care deeply about their own farmers as well. So they understand, especially someone who understands the U.S. understands these kinds of things. That being said, the Chinese are not going to do a bad trade deal. A trade deal is really bad for them in the long run. The other thing that Trump also needs to understand is he needs to understand, and hopefully derives from that book that he wrote with Tony Schwartz, that Tony Schwartz wrote for him, to understand that a really effective negotiation and a deal is a win for both sides. It has to be perceived as a win for both sides, or otherwise it will never last, it will never stick, and it may very well never get negotiated, frankly.
And I'm just kind of doing my little chicken scratch calendar here. Now, we have a March 1st deadline, I believe, for China. We have the government that may shut down in a couple of weeks. We've got the Mueller report. We've got the State of the Union, so-called, on Monday. Where do the dominoes fall here, David? I can't get my head around it.
Well, it's true, and it's going to be interesting to see what Trump does pull out of his hat for the State of the Union, and which of his advisors actually gets to write the final draft or the final take the final swipes at it before it goes into the teleprompter. That's going to be a first indication of just what kind of tone that Trump wants to set for the next 2 years of his administration. Remember, sitting right behind him on the dais while he delivers that speech, on the left will be, quite literally, on the left will be Nancy Pelosi, and on the right on our screen will be Vice President Pence. Sort of the yin and the yang of American politics, I guess, at this point. It'll be interesting to see what kind of tone he sets for that. And you're right, all these other deadlines then begin falling thick and fast. I frankly think that the Mueller report is going to be a little bit further out than a lot of people seem to suggest right now. But certainly after the State of the Union on the 15th of February is the deadline for the next round of government shutdown, potentially, which I frankly seriously doubt will ever happen. Then the first is the March 1st or March 2nd, actually, the new sanctions would go into effect March 1st for some kind of a deal or at least a freezing of the clock while negotiations continue. Even before that, of course, there could very well be a summit between Xi Jinping and Trump. This is something that they've all hinted about. Trump saying at least one summit, because frankly, I doubt that without a summit of some kind, this deal with China is not going to get done.
In your estimation, an undone deal or a no deal with China, what would be the impact domestically and economically to the United States? Is every sundry item I buy in the Walmart going to go up 25%?
Well, no. Well, some things will go up. There's no doubt about that, because China has threatened to slap its own tariffs on a large array of American goods if the U.S. begins tariffing the Chinese products coming here. But it goes even beyond that, because you have to understand that a lot of American products sold in China will become that much more expensive, and the Chinese may very well go elsewhere for them, which could impact a whole lot of not only the producers of those goods, but the people who service the producers of those goods. It's just like the shutdown. There were 800,000 American workers for the federal government who were affected, who did not get paychecks. Many of whom did not get paychecks. But beyond that, there were the hundreds of thousands, even millions more, who serviced those people who ran the luncheonettes where they have breakfast in the morning or lunch, who drive their chauffeur car, their Uber cars and whatever, or taxis that these people would otherwise not take. There were a whole lot of things that people who were deeply affected by that shutdown that were not actually
I was reading in one place that for every one person who was effectively shut down, 8 others are affected. And I mean, I can see that in my own life. If I wasn't going into a building, dropping off my dry cleaning, buying a cup of coffee, you're absolutely right.
Right, and that's where the real problems really begin. There's no doubt. But beyond that, the Chinese will then, I think, feel free to ratchet up pressure on the U.S. in a whole lot of other avenues. For instance, the Chinese, and there was testimony before Congress last week by the leaders of the U.S. intelligence community that was quite remarkable. I listened to the whole thing. And they were saying that China is as much a challenge to the U.S. in terms of intelligence, in military issues, in attempts at social penetration of the U.S., much more so even than Russia in many respects. And we pay very little attention to that. So I think that whatever restraints that might have been on that, in the hopes that there will be a tariff agreement, all restraints are off with if we can't come to some kind of a tariff and a tariff war, because that tariff war could very well spill over into a war of many other varieties between the U.S. and China.
It's almost frightening, and you've heard me say this so many times, how close we come to so many things, and the years we've spoken, and it just seems that we've narrowly averted some incredibly horrible things. Now we have
most frightening. It is frightening.
Yeah.
Actually, it's quite frightening.
3 or 4 converging at once. Now, brings me to the employment report, which I was kind of scratching my head, and I said, "For real?" It's like, how do you explain that? I mean, it was a big surprise to me, because I thought the shutdown would have affected all these things that, somebody not dropping off their dry cleaning or buying a cup of coffee or whatever. And, life seems good. Was it the seasonal work in December? I don't know.
Well, I think it might have been seasonal. Some of it was seasonal. I think one of the things that the BLS, Bureau of Labor Statistics, did say, from what I saw, is that they did not count any of the 800,000 as unemployed in any fashion, even if they applied for unemployment benefits, simply because they knew that they would be receiving those back paychecks, which means they were not technically unemployed, and that money would be
okay.
back into the economy in some fashion. So that explains part of it, and part of it is the fact that the economy is doing well. We're still growing, not perhaps as fast as we did for part of last year, but the economy is still growing. There are reasons for jobs being added, and people coming back into the workforce. So all of that is good. Again, whether that's sustainable, I can't tell, really.
And I mean, to me, and when you talk of the administration of Donald Trump, it's like on one hand you see, I don't know, and I'm going to be very polite here and call it sort of a comedy of errors with his family or Roger Stone or the other people indicted. And then you see people like, Robert Lighthizer or Steve Mnuchin or Larry Kudlow, and I'm thinking to myself, it's almost like there's 2 Trumps. The part that lets good people do what they need to do, and the other part where he doesn't know one end from the other.
Oh, I know. I mean, we could talk about Trump endlessly.
For sure.
I think it's going to be interesting. People should watch that Margaret Brennan's conversation with him during the Super Bowl tomorrow. I think that's going to be very interesting discussion. Also, I found the interview that Peter Baker, Maggie Haberman, and A.G. Sulzberger did with Trump the other day in the New York Times was very telling, and that was a very interesting. I found also it was very interesting how that came about. Perhaps your listeners would be interested in knowing that.
Sure.
Trump called up A.G. Sulzberger and invited him to a lunch or dinner at the White House, and Sulzberger said off the record dinner, an off the record discussion, and Sulzberger said, "Well, I'd rather come by for a conversation on the record and bring 2 of my reporters." And Trump said, "Oh, okay, fine," because he knows, of course, he knows Peter Baker and especially Maggie Haberman.
Mm-hmm.
Maggie for years and years, going back to her New York Post days. So all 3 of them came by, and that's how that
Now, do you believe, and because we have so many things we can talk about, but do you believe that the Democratic Congress is really going to get traction with the whole let's see your tax returns, impeachment effort, questioning the legitimacy of all that, or do you think it'll be a situation where we're kind of on to other business? I guess that could depend on so many different things.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are elements within the Democratic Party, even within Congress, that would like to see us see them go immediately towards some kind of impeachment proceeding. I think that would be an enormous mistake. Basically, it would just so energize the and ratify everything Trump has been saying and all of his supporters have been saying. I think that would be a huge mistake and a distraction from it would allow him to paint that as a distraction from doing any other kinds of business. And it was the Democrats again that failed to energize government to do anything positive for the American people. And it's never going to happen because with a Republican-controlled Senate, the House can impeach him. That's just simply indicting someone, but the Senate will never convict him, never actually remove him from office. So it's a pointless exercise, it seems to me. The tax returns are interesting. They might very well be able to get some traction there. Again, I think that's something that will be fought out in the courts, perhaps all the way to the Supreme Court. But there are just so many other priorities that Congress could turn their efforts to that
for sure.
That would be a huge distraction and a big mistake.
Now, one of the things in following you as I go, I was reading your article about Trump not going to Davos, and you said good. And I had to laugh because I certainly agree with you, and I loved your reasoning for that. It's like and somehow I drew all the parallels we've discussed over the courses of time about having a great show like the Treaty of Versailles, and like really little comes out of that. And I'm just curious what kind of feedback you got from that.
Well, first of all, the Treaty of Versailles, remember, actually produced a treaty. Agreement between the various parties. The COP21 Paris climate discussions several years ago, and I was there for all of those, that actually produced an enormous multilateral agreement between virtually every nation on Earth to try to address the climate problem. I can't imagine, frankly, that anybody could point to a single agreement or lasting contribution that Davos has made to the global
right, the betterment of mankind
around the world. Let's put it that way. So I got some agreement. Actually, I got more agreement to it than disagreement. I think the Davos people probably just ignored it entirely, and kind of dismissed this as the ravings of some commentator sitting in his New York, front of his computer in New York. But I was really serious about this. I think that we should be focusing on international forums that can really change the course of history, or change the way the world works, or how parts of the world work. I'm particularly struck. I have a book coming out that I've translated from the French. It's a wonderful book on the Reagan-Gorbachev summit in Reykjavik in 1986, when it was the last chance really that the world had to go to zero nukes, and we blew it. And it's a wonderful book. It's coming out in July from Penguin Norton and Pegasus Norton. And now with the Russians and the Americans pulling back from the INF Treaty, which was the direct outcome from this summit, you have to say there was something that actually really concretely came out from international discussions. It was an important international moment, and something important came from it. Unfortunately, it's now being dismissed and distorted by people like Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin. But it was a moment in history that really deserved to be repeated and cherished, and it's not. Davos, to get back to that, again, it's an interesting forum for people to get together and talk, but there are so many of those, really, and frankly, it's such a waste of time, effort, and resources.
Yeah, it's I wholeheartedly agree with you. This is kind of maybe a tripart question, which will bring us to our conclusion. You spent a lot of time in Paris, great economic trouble, high taxation, people rioting in the streets. We now see Venezuela, an analogous situation perhaps. We see a branch of the Democratic Party advocating very, very high pre-JFK tax rates, and we see other people who are Howard Schultz, Michael Bloomberg saying, no, that's not right to do, and perhaps causing a fissure there. Let's bring it to the Democratic Party first. Are they in danger of dividing ideologies over perhaps the more centered as opposed to the far left?
Well, what I'm concerned is that the Democratic Party is being taken over by the more extreme forces in society, and this could very well leave open Donald Trump to a second term in office, which would be the worst case scenario. The Democratic base, the far left Democratic base, and far left is probably really too pejorative a term. People who believe in certain, I think, somewhat impossible, though entirely commendable concepts that could never be funded in the United States in the current era. I think that's a real danger, that the Democratic Party gets trapped into embracing that kind of a platform, simply because I think it could lead a lot of people to either sit on their hands the next time around, or even vote for Trump, saying, look, he may be crazy, but he's at least more practical than some of these democratic ideas which threaten to bankrupt us. Just one final thing on this question of the far left and Medicare for all.
Sure.
A moment on that. As you mentioned, I spent about a third of my year in Paris. One thing I discovered is I take quite a number of drugs for my asthma. So I have 2 inhalers and a Theophylline, a pill that I take twice a day. I found that I can save enough money on each trip to Paris by buying my drugs in Paris to pay for my entire round-trip airfare each time to go there. In other words, a single inhaler in the United States of one drug, Advair, cost me $175 for a month. It's $30 in Paris. And the same with almost identical with another drug, Incruise. The Theophylline, which I take here, is about $200 a month. I can get it over there for $10 a month. It's absolutely insane, these prices that we're paying for medication. And that's just the medication part of the whole healthcare equation. So something needs to be done. And Medicare for all, I don't think, is the answer to it, because it will maintain the existing fee structure here, which is dramatically different from other countries that do have effectively a Medicare for all. And everybody would have to embrace and pay for that fee structure out of our own pocketbooks. And that's not workable.
It's incredibly chilling to watch, because John F. Kennedy, when he took office, he wanted to lower taxes because his theory was we have to get them to where there will be private investment. And I guess history does has this habit of repeating itself. I get very concerned about it myself.
I agree, absolutely. And if we, as the saying goes, if we don't learn from history, we'll wind up repeating it.
Yeah, for certain. And on our last subject, your predictions as to what's going to happen in the UK and the type of Brexit we will have, if we have one.
Brexit?
Yes.
That is another question entirely. I think I think Britain may be moving towards having another vote and rescinding the whole idea, which would be the best possible outcome in my view. If there is a Brexit, I think at this point it's probably going to have to be just a clean Brexit, which means Britain just leaves and let the chips fall where they may. I think that's a terrible idea. But I've been anti-Brexit from the beginning, and I still am. So I'm not encouraged by the whole everything that's happened in the last 6 or 8 months over there with respect to that.
It's and it's the daily drama, and none of it looks none of it at least looks comforting to this poor soul sitting here. Our guest, David Andelman, a career of incredibly remarkable scope. His book, A Shattered Peace, as far as I am concerned, is must-reading for every American. David, you mentioned a new book. Where could we be following you as we go forward, other than seeing you on CNN and the pieces that I love reading?
Well, Amazon already has An Impossible Dream, Reagan, Gorbachev, and the world, the end to the nuclear race. An Impossible Dream. I encourage people to look for that on Amazon. It's coming in July. You can always find me at CNN.com. My columns all the time, and I'm now writing for NBC News Think. I have a piece coming out probably today or early tomorrow on China and many of the other issues beyond tariffs dealing with China. And I may be starting an interesting website. I'll tell you all about that on our next get-together. How's that?
Well, that would be...
Everybody should follow me on Twitter at David Andelman.
And I certainly do. Listen, my friend, be well, stay warm, stay safe, and thank you so much for sharing with us today.
Thanks for having me on.
Alerting the stations up and down the line. We'll be back to close right after this retromercial here on Tony D'Angelo's PM Coast to Coast.
Buckle up for safety, buckle up. Buckle up for safety, always buckle up. Pull your seatbelt snug, give an extra tug. Buckle up for safety, buckle up.
Buckle up for safety, buckle up. Buckle up for safety, always buckle up. Show the world you care by the belt you wear. Buckle up for safety when you're driving. Buckle up for safety, buckle up. Buckle up for safety, always buckle up. Put your mind at ease, tell your rider, please get your seatbelts buckled, everybody buckle up.
The National Safety Council says, if you don't have seatbelts, get them. If you do have seatbelts, use them. Seatbelts can and do save lives every day.
Buckle up for safety, everybody buckle up.
Our very special thanks to our honored guest, author and international correspondent David Andelman, giving us incredibly pertinent information on what's happening in our world today. Thanks so much for listening. We'll be back to you next week with another interview. It's always a pleasure to do this show. The great people you meet, the great feedback we receive, and it's an honor to be here. So, from Tony D'Angelo here on Tony D'Angelo's PM Coast to Coast, and everyone here on the Comfortably Zoned Radio Network, remember the corporate mission of the Comfortably Zoned Radio Network. Take your slightly used children's books and donate them to a Project Head Start near you. Kids need to be reading and thinking. So, from me, Tony D'Angelo, and from everyone here on the network, have a great week. We'll see you next week. Take care and God bless.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Tony D'Angelo's PM Coast to Coast. Now, here's your host, Tony D'Angelo.
And a very good afternoon to you, wherever you may be. Up and down the stations of the Comfortably Zoned Radio Network, up and down the coast, I am Tony D'Angelo, and this is Tony D'Angelo's PM Coast to Coast. And we're going to have a little fun today. We've got a rain delay for you. Actually, this is more of a rain shower or an intermittent drip drop February 1st, 1968, 51 years ago, many things happening. Richard Nixon has declared his candidacy. Trouble in Vietnam. There's a ship being held hostage in Korea. There's corruption in Queens, New York. You got it. We've got it. It's all over the place. And one of the things we've got all the time here is some of this incredibly good music. Coming up on the charts, maybe about number 40 at this point, one of the most beautiful pieces ever done by the association, a group that belongs in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Everything that touches you will touch you with February 1st, 1968, right after this.
Not for children. This picture is not for the squeamish. This picture is not for those who think that all women sit by the fireplace knitting socks. The man-eaters, tougher than the men they hate, she-devils on the prowl. For the first time, see them as they are. Wild, vicious, with motorcycles as their lovers. She-devils on wheels. Meet queens, gorgeous, desirable, and unobtainable to any man. Meet Whitey, with the strength of a bull and a voice to match.
Oh, don't fumigate yourself, Krampus.
Astonishing tale is told for the first time. If you think you've ever seen sights like these, think again, unless you're a member of the Man-Eaters. We guarantee that this motion picture will be an astonishing experience that you will remember for the rest of your life. See it here, the story of the Man-Eaters on motorcycles, she-devils on wheels.
We'll be back with the news events of February 1st, 1968 on Comfortably Zoned Boss Radio right after this interlude.
Now, here comes the music.
Do I look bubby?
Oh, you are awful, but I like you.
Some of the news events of February 1st, 1968. The communists mauled Marines at WWII in Vietnam. LBJ, Lyndon Baines Johnson, is unsure of what to do with the USS Pueblo being confiscated in North Korea. A Queens, New York judge bribes police. Sounds like that could have been yesterday. Audrey Hepburn and Mel Ferrer try to patch things up in their marriage. Sounds like that could have been yesterday. Nixon won't debate George Romney. That could be tomorrow. Sanitation strike in New York continues as garbage piles up in the streets. And 78,000 miners strike in Pittsburgh. We'll be back with more of February 1st, 1968, right after this. Coming up with the TV and the sports of February 1st, 1968, and the movies as well, right after this interlude.
You may not find us on your TV.
On television on February 1st, 1968, Number of things you can watch. Great sports. Jerry Quarry is fighting Thad Spencer for the WBA title in Oakland, California. The Bob Hope Desert Classic is taking place. And later on tonight, you can watch Phil Silvers in the Hollywood Palace. Some of the movies playing: The Jungle Book, In the Heat of the Night, The Professionals, and Cool Hand Luke. In sports, our friend Bob Segrin posted a world record in the pole vault in the Knights of Columbus games at Madison Square Garden. Vince Lombardi quit the profession of coaching football, and young Janet Lynn at 15 years old is stealing medals and hearts at the Olympics. The Celtics beat the Bullets 120-99, and the Rangers lost to the Bruins. We'll be right back with our world-famous baseball birthdays right after this. No matter what state the world is in, no matter what is happening, no matter whom I may get to speak to, the friends and fans of this show will not give me any peace and will threaten me incessantly if I do not do the baseball birthdays. So here we go. Baseball birthdays, February 1st. Players who were born on February 1st. John Tudor, a fine left-handed pitcher, won 117 games over 12 years, career cut short by arm trouble. Great competitor, was in the postseason. He collects Social Security today. He is age 65. John is from upstate New York, was a Red Sox and a Dodger. Pat Tabler, an all-star first baseman for 12 years, turns 61 today. And get this, Pucci Delgado, 13 games for the 1977 Seattle Mariners and 4 hits, never to be heard from again. I don't think he's collecting Social Security. I think he's in Puerto Rico, but he would be if he were here. He blows out 65 candles. We wish John Tudor, Pat Tabler, and Pucci Delgado the happiest of birthdays. We'll be signing out right after this. Kind of rushing to a conclusion today. As we leave February 1st, 1968, we thank, I don't know who we really can thank here. Maybe we can thank Bob Segrin. He's been a wonderful guy to us through the years. Really can't thank Richard Nixon. I don't know about the biker women in the movies. You decide whatever you want to do. But whatever you do decide, do remember, always, 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 donate your slightly used children's books to a Project Head Start near you. Kids need to read, and kids need to think, especially now. It's really crazy out there. They need to develop their minds. Get them out from behind that computer and get them behind a book. So, from Tony D'Angelo here on Tony D'Angelo's PM Coast to Coast, and I'm sure from all of the jocks and hosts on the Comfortably Zoned Boss Radio Network, have a wonderful week. We'll be sure to see you next week. Kayuskade, be well, be safe. Bye! See ya! Thanks once again, Dan Ingram. God bless you.
The proceeding was a Comfortably Zoned Radio Network production. Thank you for listening.